In 2004, in October, there were some new parts of the then Equality, well, what was then the Equality Act. It's called the Disability Discrimination Act. And it was mostly about goods and services and how shops had a responsibility from that point in law to make their businesses accessible to disabled people. And in the year or two leading up to that change in the law, there was a lot of stuff in the media about people who own businesses complaining about how there was a great expense connected to making their premises accessible, and how disabled people having a legal right to use their business, therefore might have a legal right to sue them if their business wasn't accessible in the right way. And so there was a lot of really kind of uninformed ableist complaining about, people are going to come into the shop and they won't be able to get in and they're going to sue me and I'm going to lose my business. And oh my God. And I really started to take umbrage at that. And I really started to feel like, well, there's actually a lot more to it. And you're talking about disabled people like they're a problem. And really the problem is not, it doesn't belong to them and it doesn't belong to you. It's a legacy that we've had that society isn't fully accessible. And that goes down to attitudes as well as what physical buildings are like. And so I began to think about making a piece of work that was a rebuttal to this kind of, access is difficult and why should we have to do it sort of thing. And this talking about of disabled people like they were the problem. Because eventually, ultimately, if you can go into a shop and you're a disabled person, you're going in there to spend money. There is a positive to that wasn't really being explored or even kind of celebrated, really, because it's having been a wheelchair user on and off throughout my life due to my fluctuations with my impairment. When you do use a wheelchair, it's quite liberating to be able to go places. And the idea of being able to go to more places was wonderful to me. And at the same time, I was listening to a lot of people complaining about me going into shops. I started to take it quite personally. So I started to think about a way of connecting all the different ways disabled people wanted to talk about access to a series of work which would really give a perspective that was from the disabled point of view. And to do that, I knew that it had to be collaborative because I can't speak for a deaf person because I'm not deaf. I don't really know. I can guess maybe what a blind person might say about the barriers they experience, but I don't know. And one of the really great things about disability activism is that it's happened with a lot of people coming together. So I started thinking about, okay, so it's going to be a collaborative project. It's going to be community-based. And road signs seem to be a very kind of ready-made visual system, which would be very easily adaptable for people who wanted to make information signs or warning signs or danger signs or direction signs. And so the road signs being changed to other things has been done in the past, as like cartoons and silly T-shirts and so on. But I just kind of thought, actually, there's an awful lot to say about disability rights and access. So why not use that system? And that's how it came to be, road signs. And I worked with disabled people in Milton Keynes. And I was living in Milton Keynes at that point. And there were a lot of disabled people in Milton Keynes because Milton Keynes was a new build city. So it was a lot more accessible. So if people wanted physical access, it was a really great place to go shopping. You could go to the council buildings. Councils in a lot of towns are housed in really old buildings that are often really bad for access. But with Milton Keynes, it was much easier. And so I went to various groups over the course of a few months, and then gave them blank templates with all the road signs on and said, make a danger sign, make a warning sign. What do you want to warn people about? And I really planned from the start for the exhibition to launch on the 1st of October 2004, when the new DDA legislation came in, so that journalists would go for it. There would be something out there on that day that was from a disability perspective. And it worked really well. The publicity was really good. It was on the news. It toured. It went to Trafalgar Square. Ken Livingstone came and talked to me about it. There were many signs which people just understood instinctively and personally, and not just disabled people, because actually when you're talking about being frustrated and not being able to get access to somewhere, the feeling itself, frustration, is very much part of the human condition. Pretty much everybody can understand what it's like to not be able to do something and how that feels. And so in that way, and also because the rules of the road are a system that we don't question, people really related to it. So I suppose I'm going to start by saying that this was a really interesting addition to the previous project that I'd done, The Way Ahead, which I did in 2004, because there are a number of changes, some of them expected, like I was going to be taking full control of the graphic design. And in 2004, I wasn't able to do that because I just didn't have, I'd graduated from art college and it was my second residency. I didn't have access to the kind of computer software that was needed to make a vector file. It was a lot harder to get hold of in those days. And now, during the pandemic, I just happened to be teaching myself vector design, and the software is much more accessible. So I was able to buy a package and start learning. And so I had a lot more creative control with the Barnsley 15 than I did with The Way Ahead. And also the kind of unique situation that we found ourselves in with the pandemic meant the workshops idea that we had, which was going to be face-to-face workshops, just completely changed, because instead of being able to come up to Barnsley and work with local disabled groups, we were trying to figure out how we could do it all virtually, which was quite a thing at the time. And I was really grateful to you, Jason, and to David for being open to just keeping the idea of, doing this project alive and not saying, oh, it's the pandemic, it's too hard, we can't do it. And I think there's a lot to be said for how, if you have that attitude that, yes, we can do it, and yes, we'll find a way to make it accessible, then it's much more rewarding when you find a way through, because we did, and it worked, and we've got a set of signs now which I feel are really contemporary, and I really hope the participants feel met their expectations for what their signs were going to look like, because it was very much more that I was taking artistic license without a backwards and forwards conversation, which would have taken place in the workshops.
So Caroline created a fold-out worksheet with a poster on one side, and on the other side were 4 blank road sign templates, and these were given to the 4 participating groups in the project, which equaled about 75 people altogether. And they completed their worksheets in their own time or within their own groups. And out of that, we had about 35 different ideas submitted to the project. And those were handed to Caroline. And then Caroline started to, I suppose, make a short list of the potential, what would become the 15 signs in the installation. So Caroline's going to talk about a selection of those signs now.
The great thing about doing a collaborative project and getting other people's ideas is that people surprise you. And for an artist, that's really great, because it means that it just stretches your idea of what the project is in your head, and it takes it that much further, because with a collective voice, there are all sorts of different things that you never would have thought of on your own. And so the first sign I'm going to talk about is a triangular warning sign called Wait. And the person drew something on their blank template that looked like an optician's chart. And I think they were just trying to, I gave this the title Wait, but I think originally the person just wanted to get that message across that sometimes it's difficult to understand things. And this I liked because it was a very general thing. I mean, everybody has that experience where, something's difficult. And the way they'd written it made me think of actually the way you read an optician's chart, or the way you read text when it's laid out in a way which is unfamiliar, is you take it slowly and you need to take that extra time. And I felt that would be a very interesting thing for the audience to have to do with that sign. So the sign, it actually says, with the letters arranged like an optician's chart, it is difficult to understand certain things. But the first time you see it, and I tried this out on my partner over lockdown, you have to just pause and maybe you watch somebody. I can't wait to come and see somebody actually try and read it. So I watch somebody and their lips are moving. It is difficult, and they're just trying to piece the words together. And at the bottom, this is the warning, and it says wait. And that is because from an access point of view, if it takes somebody longer to understand something, then it's simply polite to wait. And we find it quite easy to wait for other people. But I sometimes feel that a disabled person who maybe has some kind of cognitive impairment is perhaps more judged if they need to take that extra time. So I was really pleased to have a sign that was quite interactive for the viewer, that would make the point that, you get there in the end, but it's just going to take you, when you look at that sign, just a bit more time to understand it. So I'm now going to talk about a sign, which is another triangular sign, and it says, I need more time to think. So we've got in this sign somebody's head, and out of the head, sort of spilling out of the mind, really, are cogs with little hands on. So each cog has got 12 gears, just like the clock, because it's about time. And so the symbol of the clock hands in there is all meant to it's all meant to connect that idea of cogs turning and the time it takes. And I was just really happy with this, with the person did a lovely drawing, and I just had to try and think about how I can fit it into a triangular shape. And this was part of the design of each sign, really. Sometimes people would come back with drawings, but then from a graphic sense, it's just how do you make it into one thing? And not only that, but something that fits into quite an unusual shape for a graphic, which is a triangle or a circle or a rectangle, because it has to work in that shape too. So I basically just put the bits of their drawing together for that one. But I think it makes a really good logo as well. I think you almost don't need the supplementary plate underneath. You can see that it's about time, and you can see it's clocks, and you can see it's about the mind. So I'm quite interested in logo design and infographics, and I just felt that one came together particularly well. I'm now going to talk about a sign called "Do Not Assume I Am a Robber." Because when we got this back from somebody, I remember us discussing it and we were chuckling because we both understood it. But then, and it's just so, it was such a kind of off the cuff remark that was easily understandable in the context of if your body moves a bit differently, or you can't make eye contact, or maybe you make involuntary movements. Then when you're out and about, people do make assumptions, and that judgment, to make a sign that was essentially about judgment, using a scenario where somebody was very conscious that someone else was making a judgment about them, which was negative. It was a bit of a challenge, and I was really, really happy to make up this sign. And it took me quite a while. There were many, many versions of it. And hopefully it sums up visually okay, where you've got the person and you can see that their head's turning. They've just realised they've been noticed. And you can tell they're in a shop because they're standing in front of a dress. And you can see that maybe their arms have been moving or their foot's been tapping in a way which has drawn the attention of the other figure in the sign, which is a security guard. So once I had the idea, like so much of sign design, it's paring it down to the only elements that you need. So I felt like it had to have a sense of place, which is why the dress is there. And I felt like I needed to identify, between the person and the person looking by designating somebody with a particular role, which is to watch people and watch for suspicious movements. So I look at that sign now and I feel it's quite successful, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what other people think about that in particular. I would love to meet the person who made that sign. I hope I do. But just anyway, I think when I come up to Barnsley and watch people react to that sign, I really hope it's positive, because I just enjoyed making it so much. So I'm going to talk now about another circular sign, which is, so circles are danger signs. And in the pandemic, I wanted to make some signs that were related to the time they were made in. I think that's really important. And the pandemic itself has caused all sorts of other issues for disabled people. And this particular sign talks about one of them. Where is the BSL interpreter? When the government gave COVID briefings, there was a great uproar from the deaf community because there was no BSL interpreter, and where public were getting really crucial information, lockdowns were happening, safety advice was being given, things that people really needed to know quickly. The fact that there wasn't a BSL interpreter at the government briefings was just, when you think about it, it was a massive access faux pas. And there was a really great campaign called Where's the Interpreter?, which was very much about deaf people challenging the government. So deaf people challenging the government was, I think, disability rights in action. It was a real shame. I wish it hadn't happened. But we need to make sure in society, particularly modern society, that basic things like this don't happen. And the only way we can do that is by talking about it. And I think also by recording it culturally. We need to show that, this was a big deal during the pandemic. And I'm really pleased that when I got one of the worksheets back, it talked about people not having access and deaf people not having access. And so that idea was quite general, but what I gave to this sign was actually putting a time and a place where this had happened, where there wasn't access for deaf people. So the sign itself, the drawing, not only do you see somebody making the sign for wear with a question mark on their body, but you actually see a politician standing at a podium, and there's a speech bubble coming from their mouth, and then there's the COVID virus in there. And that politician, I did make a little bit on the heavy side, and I did give slightly tousled hair just to refer to our Prime Minister at the time. And the podium itself is actually modelled on the podium that we would see in COVID briefings. When you think about how a podium looks, I could have just done something very basic, but I just wanted to place that image in a time and space. And the microphone, again, it's a very small microphone, but the point is that that's what the microphones looked like during the COVID briefing. They weren't that kind of microphone that you might think of with the great big cover on it with a round shape at the end. And that's what the podium looked like. So that's just meant to say this happened, and it's 2021, and it was a really dangerous time in people's lives, and access was missing. Easy to just go and look at clip art, and there's clip art of brains drawn in all sorts of different ways. And this was a challenge to me personally. My learning curve at the time, getting used to this new medium, and I didn't have a studio in lockdown. My partner was using our second bedroom, which I use as my studio, as his office. And so I was sitting with my laptop, learning this vector software. My learning curve was massively steep, just making sure that I was ready to start making artwork with it. So the brain going up the hill, again, it was just one of those times where I just felt that the title, which I think was given to me by somebody, really could hopefully visually be matched by a brain going up a hill, which also refers to the road sign. Yes, so it's very similar to the road sign that was actually submitted, wasn't it? So the drawing that was submitted was almost the same as the sign. The only difference was where the brain is on wheels. I think the person had drawn a question mark, and I just wanted to make it a bit more specific to the brain. So there is the brain, and it's a road sign. So the brain is a car, and it's going up a steep slope. So that just felt. And some signs, it's kind of struggle for ages to resolve them and find a logo which really matches the text. Or when I say a logo, I guess I mean a picture, an infographic of some kind. But I felt that one worked really well. I was really pleased with it. And it was a personal journey for me at the same time. Okay, so now I'm going to go to a triangular warning sign, which is benefit cuts ahead. So this is actually something that's been an ongoing issue in disabled communities for quite a long time. And again, I felt like it's something that needs to be recorded. It's a very big issue for disabled people at this point in time. And with the pandemic, it really is becoming more and more sharply focused. There's lots and lots of layers to benefit cuts, not least is people being declared for work. If you're clinically vulnerable and you have been declared fit for work, then when a pandemic comes along, that's another layer of stress. So not only are people going through all sorts of different trials with benefit sanctions and personal independence payment interviews, they're also dealing with that during a pandemic. And the thing that for me really was key to this sign was actually putting the DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, wording at the top of the piece of paper that you see in the sign, because I wanted something that looked quite similar to the logo on the top of the letters people get. Because letters in themselves, the brown envelopes they come in, and that logo is enough for some people to feel incredibly traumatized. The worry about having their benefits being cut is always heralded by that visual signal. And although I couldn't include a brown envelope in that sign, I did want to just put the logo in the top. And the rest is quite self-explanatory. You see PIP for personal independence payment, and you see ESA for employment support allowance being cut with some scissors, which is just as clear as it needs to be about the benefit cuts that people are experiencing at this point in time. There's about to be a benefit reduction for people as well. Post-pandemic, some of the benefit top-up that was being given to people is about to be removed. At the same time, energy prices are going up. So it's a massively topical subject, a massively topical sign to have in the Barnsley 15. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about a rectangular direction sign called Inequality Exposed. So a lot of the signs are about the pandemic, but given the adaptation we all had to make at the Civic to adapt the project so that we could still deliver it in the pandemic, as we were doing that, the pandemic was massively impacting people's lives. And Equality Exposed really talks about all the different ways, and there are many more that this sign doesn't include. I could make a whole series of signs about the inequalities that the pandemic exposed, but the roundabout that you see leads at the very top to the toll of being labelled the vulnerable, most at risk. That included me and many of the participants, and all the destinations off these roundabouts are things that were happening to people at the time. There is a sign already about no BSL, sign provided for the government daily briefings. Some disabled people found that they had had automatic do not resuscitate orders put onto their medical file, and some elderly people as well. It's never a good thing to find out about your medical records. Additional issues like people not being able to lip read through face masks that weren't clear. If you rely on lip reading when somebody isn't signing BSL to you, then that's, just that was completely gone for some people. So what do you do, for example, if, you have a relative who's in hospital and you're trying to get an update and you just can't lip read and can't tell what the person is saying? There was a huge scandal about retirement and residential homes being quickly and thoroughly infected by people in the pandemic coming back quite early on before we had COVID testing. There were people who were missed from the shielding list. So priority access to food and medical supplies was really difficult. That was something that I related to early on in the pandemic. In fact, I got my shielding letter at the point that people were no longer advised to shield. The government wrote to me and said, you don't have to shield anymore. But they didn't send me a letter in the first place saying I had to. I knew I had to, but it's just one of those things that you just feel a little bit less safe. And then the lack of personal protection equipment for personal assistance. So I put PPA there. I think personal protection access is what I was thinking. Many people who have personal assistants, maybe those personal assistants are going from home to home. When you need essential care, it doesn't stop when there's a pandemic. If your personal assistant doesn't have any personal protection, they don't have masks provided or gloves or aprons or visors or anything, then not only are they more vulnerable to the virus, and that was an incredibly difficult thing for many, many people in many professions doing jobs where equipment wasn't provided, but also when they were working with disabled people who might be more vulnerable to COVID, then that was also a big stress. So there were many inequalities that the pandemic exposed, and that sign just talks about a few of them.
Thank you to Caroline for talking about the project and 7 of the signs. There are another 8 that you can view, and you see them all in person. And you'll have highlights of those on this video as well. Thank you to Here and Now and the National Lottery and Future Arts Centres for funding the project, and to the groups that took part in it. If you want to find out more about Caroline, you can do on Instagram at Caroline_Cardus, and on Twitter at Caroline Cardus. Maybe you want to share your own experiences with her as well and tell her what you thought of the signs. And we hope you enjoyed them. Thank you.